There are places in Dubai that were supposed to be the future. Entire districts designed from scratch, marketed as the next great address for the global elite. Places where the wealthy would live, invest, spend, and stay forever. And for a brief window of time, it looked like that future was arriving exactly on schedule. But something happened. Not overnight, not dramatically. Slowly, quietly, in the way that only a city built on projection and perception can start to unravel. Streets that were drawn on architectural blueprints with names and fountains and retail corridors are now silent. Buildings that were sold as landmarks before the cement dried now sit somewhere between unfinished and forgotten. The luxury map that investors around the world were handed a decade ago no longer matches the territory on the ground. If you want to understand what's really happening beneath the surface of cities like Dubai, stay with us and subscribe. We track the cracks that the brochures are paid to hide, and what we're about to show you will change the way you read any city's skyline from here on. Because here is the uncomfortable truth that the real estate industry, the tourism boards, and the government-linked media outlets are not particularly interested in discussing. Dubai did not just build too much. Dubai built the wrong things, in the wrong places, for people who were never actually going to live there. And now, at least 15 of those districts, areas that were once drawn on the luxury map with gold ink, have been quietly crossed off. What you're about to hear is not speculation. It's not pessimism. It's a pattern that repeats every time a city tries to build its identity faster than its population can grow into it. Let's start with a number that explains everything. At the peak of Dubai's construction boom, the emirate was reportedly home to roughly 25% of the world's total operating tower cranes. One city, 1/4 of all cranes on Earth. That figure alone tells you something important about the philosophy behind Dubai's expansion. Build it, and they will come. Announce it, and the investors will arrive. Sell the vision before you've poured the foundation. For a while, it worked. Capital flooded in. Prices rose. The numbers looked extraordinary. But capital flowing in on the promise of future value and actual human beings choosing to build lives in a place are two entirely different things. And when you build 15 districts on the logic of the first category while assuming the second will follow automatically, you eventually end up with what Dubai has now: glass and steel on a massive scale, and not nearly enough people to fill it. The districts that have gone quiet are not all the same story. Some of them were abandoned mid-construction when the 2008 financial crisis hit and the developers simply stopped. Some of them were completed, handed over, and then slowly drained as residents discovered that a beautiful address with no functioning community around it is not actually a place anyone wants to live. And some of them represent a newer, and perhaps more troubling category: places that were sold as luxury, but have spent the last several years watching their residents and tenants quietly leave without replacement. Take the example of what happened in the areas surrounding several of the more ambitious waterfront projects. The idea was architecturally compelling. You would have a master-planned neighborhood with promenades, cafes, a marina, retail, residential towers, all connected into a walkable, livable district. The renders were flawless, the launch events were spectacular, and the first wave of buyers, often investors rather than end users, purchased units on the strength of what those renders promised. But renders don't account for the reality that in a city where temperatures reach 45 degrees Celsius for 3 months of the year, a waterfront promenade is only usable for a fraction of the calendar. They don't account for the fact that a cafe strip only survives if there are enough people walking past it every day to keep the economics viable. And they don't account for the peculiar economics of a market where so many units are owned by investors who are renting them out to other investors who are themselves renting them to short-term visitors. In that kind of chain, the moment demand softens anywhere, the entire structure becomes fragile. And demand did soften. Slowly at first, then more visibly. The retail floors stayed half empty. The cafe strip never materialized as planned. The promenade got the fountains, but not the foot traffic. And gradually, the residential towers started showing the occupancy numbers that analysts try to report carefully, and developers try to explain away with language about market cycles. But this is only one part of the story. And here is where it gets more interesting, because what killed these districts was not simply bad planning. It was a specific economic logic that made sense on paper and broke down in practice. Dubai's model for decades was built on the arrival of new people, expats coming to work, tourists flying in for short stays, investors buying and holding units. The city did not need to grow organically from within its existing population in the way that London or Tokyo or New York does, because it was always importing its growth. New arrivals meant new demand. New demand justified new construction. New construction attracted new capital. And so the cycle continued. What started to change was the cost of entry into that cycle. Because at a certain point, Dubai stopped being cheap. Not for ultra-high net worth individuals, for whom it has always been a tax-efficient base and a lifestyle statement, but for the middle tier, for the professional expat earning a good, but not extraordinary salary, for the entrepreneur trying to set up a regional business without burning capital on overheads, for the family weighing up where to put down roots versus where to simply pass through. That group, which had always been the actual population backbone of Dubai's functioning neighborhoods, started doing the math differently, and the math was no longer working the way it once did. Rents doubled in certain areas between 2020 and 2024. Service charges on properties climbed. The cost of schooling, healthcare, and basic services rose in a way that compressed the financial advantage that had always been Dubai's strongest argument to the world. Yes, there is no income tax, but when your rent is 40% of your salary, the tax savings stops feeling like salvation. What this meant for the abandoned districts is important to understand, because these were not primarily places where Dubai's ultra-wealthy were ever going to live permanently. They were places designed to absorb the incoming wave of aspirational middle-class expats and the global investor base. When both of those groups started recalculating, the districts that depended on them most were the ones that emptied fastest. You can see this pattern playing out in the way certain areas of Dubai that were once listed prominently in real estate marketing have essentially disappeared from the conversation. The agents still have the inventory, the listings still exist, but the urgency is gone. The narrative around those postcodes has shifted from the next big address to something that sounds more like wait and see. Now, here is what makes this genuinely significant, and why this matters far beyond Dubai itself. Because what is happening in those 15 districts is not a Dubai-specific failure. It is a preview. It is what happens to any city that builds its identity on projection rather than population, that tries to manufacture prestige before it has earned it organically, that sells a future so aggressively it forgets to build the present. We have seen versions of this story in other contexts. Ghost cities in China where entire districts sat empty for years because the construction logic was disconnected from actual human movement. Speculative neighborhoods in southern Europe where the pre-crisis building boom left streets of completed apartments that no one was living in a decade later. Waterfront developments in cities from the Gulf to Southeast Asia where the marketing images and the ground reality diverged in ways that took years to become visible. Dubai is not a ghost city. Let's be precise about that. Large parts of it are functioning, expensive, and genuinely attractive to the global elite in ways that are not going to disappear. Downtown Dubai, the established areas around the marina, the districts with genuine commercial density, these are not emptying. In some cases, they are more expensive and more crowded than they have ever been. But the luxury map has been rewritten. What was once drawn as a wide territory of premium addresses across dozens of districts has contracted into a smaller, more concentrated set of locations. The sprawl is not working. The experiment of replicating prestige across a vast geographic footprint has produced winners and losers. And the losers are not visible from the promotional photography. There is something almost architectural in the way this happened. If you look at Dubai from above, the functioning premium areas tend to cluster around specific nodes, places where enough massive activity created a self-sustaining loop. Infrastructure arrived, businesses followed. People came for the businesses, more businesses came for the people. The node became real. Around those nodes, at varying distances, you find the quieter places. The districts that were supposed to become the next node but never achieved the critical mass required, where the infrastructure arrived but the businesses didn't follow in sufficient numbers, where the people came to invest but not to live, where the loop never closed. What does this mean for the thousands of people who bought into those districts? That is the human story running underneath the economics, and it is not a comfortable one, because for many of them, the purchase decision was made on the basis of a vision that has not materialized. Service charges are due annually regardless of whether the coffee shop downstairs ever opened. Rental yields in areas without functioning community amenities are lower than in areas with them. And selling at a profit becomes complicated when the buyer pool for a half-developed district is narrow. This is the version of Dubai that the expats who have been leaving describe, not the Dubai of impossible skylines and tax-free salaries, but the Dubai of a lease on a beautiful apartment in a district that feels like a film set between shoots, architecturally impressive, functionally incomplete, and increasingly expensive for the privilege of being there. The people who are staying, the ones who are making Dubai work on their terms, tend to share a profile. They are operating at a level where the cost is either irrelevant or offset by genuine business advantage. They are in the nodes, not the fringe. They have made a deliberate calculation that the advantages outweigh the costs at their specific income level. And they are not confused about what Dubai is. They are not waiting for it to become a different kind of city. They are using it for exactly what it currently is. Everyone else is running the math more carefully than they used to. And a growing number of them are coming to the conclusion that a different city, one with less spectacle but more substance, makes more sense for their actual life. This is the longer-term story that those 15 empty districts are telling. Not just that Dubai overbuilt, but that the population Dubai was building for, the aspirational global middle class who would fill those towers and activate those promenades, has become more mobile, more selective, and more willing to say no than Dubai's planners ever factored into the models. Bangkok is cheaper and warmer in a livable way. Lisbon still offers European residency routes and a cultural richness that Dubai cannot replicate. Mexico City has a depth of urban life that no master-planned district can manufacture from scratch. Kuala Lumpur gives you Southeast Asian connectivity at a fraction of Dubai's cost structure. And none of those cities require you to exist in a district that was built for a future version of itself that has not arrived yet. The luxury map has been rewritten. That is not a crisis in the way a financial collapse is a crisis. It is quieter, and in some ways, more consequential. It is a recalibration of where in the world people with options choose to spend their lives. And the districts that Dubai built for them, the ones that now sit in various states of emptiness between the towers that are working and the desert that surrounds everything, are the visible evidence of that recalibration. What happens next is genuinely uncertain. Dubai is not without resources, capacity, or ambition. The response to any softening in one part of the market tends to be another wave of announcement, another master plan, another architectural vision unveiled at a press event with renders that are impeccable and timelines that are optimistic. Whether that response eventually closes the gap between what was promised and what exists on the ground is the question that investors, expats, and analysts are watching. But what is already true cannot be unbuilt. The 15 districts that no longer appear prominently on the luxury map are there. They were built, they were sold, and they are now among the most honest structures in the entire city, because unlike the promotional materials and the press releases, they cannot be photoshopped. They simply sit there, in the heat, waiting for a future that may or may not still be coming. If you want to keep tracking what is really happening in cities like this one, where the gap between the projected version and the lived version keeps widening, subscribe. There are more cities where this pattern is developing right now, and understanding it early is the difference between making smart decisions and inheriting someone else's optimism.